Her body temperature was lowered to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that surgeons call this state standstill. By every instrument modern medicine has, she did not exist as a conscious being. And yet, when she woke up, she described a conversation she could not have heard, a tool she could not have seen, words spoken in a room where, according to the machines, there was no one left inside her head to hear them. Her name is Pam Reynolds. Stay with me, because the detail that makes this case different from every other NDE story isn't what she felt. It's what she heard and what she saw. While the machines insisted there was nothing left in there to hear or see with anything, Pam Reynolds was 35 years old, a singer-songwriter from Atlanta, and she had a giant aneurysm, a swollen, weakened blood vessel at the base of her brainstem. It was so large and so deep that surgeons couldn't reach it the normal way. Operating on it directly risked rupturing it instantly. And if it ruptured, she would be dead within minutes. There was only one surgeon in the world doing the procedure that could save her. His name was Dr. Robert Spetzler at the Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix. And the procedure he was about to perform required something that sounds less like surgery and more like science fiction. To reach that aneurysm safely, Dr. Spetzler's team would need to do 3 things to Pam Reynolds that, separately, would each be considered a medical emergency. They would stop her heart completely. They would drain the blood from her brain completely. And they would cool her body down to the temperature of a glass of ice water. This procedure has a name. Doctors call it Hypothermic Cardiac Arrest. Pam Reynolds and the small group of researchers who would later study her case would come to call it something else. They would call it being put to death on purpose to save her life.
Now I need you to hold this fact in your mind, because everything that follows depends on it. Before they began, the surgical team did something to make absolutely sure they would know, with certainty, the exact moment Pam Reynolds' brain stopped functioning. They taped her eyes shut. They placed molded inserts into her ears, and through those inserts, they played a continuous clicking sound, 100 decibels, as loud as a chainsaw, directly into her ears. Why would they do that? Because that clicking sound wasn't for her. It was for the machines. This is called a Brainstem Auditory Evoked Potential test, and it is one of the most sensitive tests in all of medicine for one specific question. Is any part of this brain still processing anything at all? Even when a person is in a deep coma, even when the higher brain, the thinking brain, has shut down, the brainstem will usually still register sound. It's automatic. It's older than consciousness itself. If that clicking sound stops registering, there is nothing left. Not thought, not awareness, not even the most basic ancient reflex response a human brain is capable of. Doctors began the procedure. They opened Pam's skull. Body temperature dropped. 91 degrees, 86, 79, 70, until it reached 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Her heart stopped. All the blood was drained from her body and head. Her EEG, the machine that measures the brain's electrical activity, went completely flat. And then, the clicking stopped registering too. Think about what you are being asked to accept here. Not she was unconscious, not she was in a coma. The most primitive, reflexive part of her brain, the part that doesn't require thought, doesn't require awareness, the part that keeps you breathing while you sleep, stopped responding to sound entirely. By every definition medicine has, in that moment, Pam Reynolds was not there. And it was during this exact window, this window where the machines say there was nothing, that something happened that changed everything.
Pam Reynolds later said that during this period, she found herself outside her body, floating above the operating table, looking down. And here is where it gets impossible to dismiss. She didn't describe a vague glow or a feeling of peace. She described specific, mechanical details, the kind of details that, if true, could be checked against the surgical team's actual equipment and conversation. She said she saw a tool that looked, in her words, like an electric toothbrush, with a case that held interchangeable attachments, like a socket wrench set. That tool was a Midas Rex bone saw, a specialized surgical drill most people, including most surgeons outside neurosurgery, have never seen up close. Its case does hold interchangeable bits, arranged exactly the way she described. She said she heard a voice, a woman's voice, say that her arteries were too small. When researchers later reviewed the surgical records, they found that exact exchange. Early in the procedure, the cardiac surgeon had discovered that the blood vessels in Pam's groin, the ones needed for the bypass machine, were too small on one side. A female member of the surgical team had said so, out loud, in the room. This conversation happened before Pam was placed into Standstill, but Pam said she perceived it from outside her body, from a vantage point above the table, looking down at her own physical form. I want you to sit with this for a moment. Her eyes were taped shut. Her ears were filled with 100 decibel clicking that her own brainstem had stopped responding to. And yet, she described the visual appearance of a piece of equipment she had never seen, and a verbal exchange about a medical detail she had no way of knowing. But what happened next is the part of Pam's account that, even among NDE researchers, is considered one of the most striking on record. She said she moved away from the operating room entirely, toward a light. And in that light, she said she encountered people she recognized, deceased relatives, an uncle, her grandmother. She described being told, in this state, that it was not yet her time. And then, she said, she was returned. Pulled back, she described it, like Alice falling back through the rabbit hole. The surgery was a success. Pam Reynolds lived for another 19 years after this operation. Now, I need to address the most obvious counter-argument directly, because if I don't, you should be skeptical of everything else in this video. The skeptic's argument goes like this. Maybe Pam wasn't fully under the entire time. Maybe there was a window, before Standstill or after, where she was lightly sedated, and she heard things, and her brain reconstructed a visual memory afterward to match what she heard. This is a reasonable objection. Anesthesia awareness is real and documented. Here's the problem with applying it to this case. The conversation about her arteries and the appearance of the bone saw, Pam placed both of these events as happening from an out-of-body visual perspective, looking down at the table, not as something she heard and pictured later, as something she said she saw, in real time, from above. And the timing researchers were able to reconstruct places these events at a point where Pam's eyes were already taped shut, and her ear canals were already filled with clicking sound loud enough to mask normal room conversation. Clicking sound that, by the brainstem monitor's own readings, her brain was not even processing. Dr. Michael Sabom, a cardiologist who spent years investigating this case, went through the complete medical records, interviewed the surgical team members individually, and cross-referenced every detail Pam reported against what actually happened in that room. He published his findings, and his conclusion was not, "This proves the soul leaves the body." His conclusion was more careful than that, and I'd argue, more powerful. He said, the verified details in this case cannot currently be explained by
any conventional model of how the brain produces perception. Not memory reconstruction, not anesthesia awareness, not coincidence. That is not a researcher promising you the afterlife is real. That is a researcher saying the model science currently has for how consciousness works does not account for what happened in that world. And that gap between what happened and what our court model can explain is the entire reason this case is still studied more than 3 decades later. Subscribe, because next week we go to a case that's even harder to dismiss. A Harvard-trained neurosurgeon, a man who spent 25 years teaching that near-death experiences were nothing but dying brain hallucinations, spent 7 days in a coma so severe his neocortex had completely shut down. And what he saw changed his mind about his own science.
That case is next. You already know something most people spend their whole lives avoiding. That is not nothing. That is the beginning.